Good afternoon and welcome to the Stratus and Beat the GMAT webinar. Today we are talking about 2018 resolution, get an MBA. If that's what you've resolved to do this year, you are in the right place to learn what you need to be doing, what you need to be thinking about as you go about this journey. My name is Susan Cera and I'm here with my colleague Harold Szymanski. We're going to wait a couple minutes past the top of the hour for a few more people to join us. And while we are waiting, I'm going to do some quick polls to get a sense of who's with me, so we can kind of craft the direction of our conversation to those of you who are with us. So with that in mind, a few questions. Here's the first poll. Where are you located? Sitting today, I'm in North Carolina, so I'm in that east of the Mississippi. And my colleague Harold is in a cooler place here east of Mississippi, up in the Boston area.
Freezing, I would say.
Oh man, don't miss that. It is rather cold here in North Carolina. We've had a very cold winter so far, record-breaking cold. And we've got a bunch of people who have voted half east of the Mississippi, and then some folks. Oh, we got a couple more people voting here. There's at least one person in other that's not in east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi, Asia, or EMEA. Always curious as to where you are. Are you in South America? Are you in Antarctica? Are you maybe in Canada? Put into the questions where you are, because I'm always curious as to where these people are who are not in these kind of bulk places. All right, I'm going to close this out, but we've got almost evenly distributed east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi, Asia, and other. Let me close this poll out. Next question is, when do you intend to start an MBA? Some of you guys may be with us because you're hoping to start later this year. If you're intending to start later this year, you need to jump on it right now. Most of you, though, are saying you want to start in 2019. So wait another couple seconds here for a few more people to respond. We've got about 40% are planning to start this year. About 50% are planning to start in 2019. And the remainder haven't decided yet when they're going to apply. So with that, let me close out this poll. How many years of work experience do you have at this time? Keep in mind that, when you start, you will probably have either 6 months more than what you have right now, or 18 months, or maybe even 30 months more, whatever that math is. The kind of sweet spot for business school is 4 to 5 years of work experience, with the 80% range for most top programs being in the 3 to 8 years. And this is for the full-time 2-year programs. We're beginning to see a lot more opportunities out there for 1-year mid-career MBA programs, lots of different options out there. And so just want to get a sense of who's with us. With most of the people voted, we've got about 20% have less than 3 years. And then the remainder is equally distributed, about 25% each of 3 to 4, 5 to 6, or more than 6 years. So thanks for your answers there. One last question before we start. Have you taken the GMAT or the GRE? As you know, this is a core piece of the MBA application process. Sometimes people are really confident test takers. I've had a lot of clients who were really thinking ahead, and in their senior spring in college or immediately after they graduated from college, they took that MBA. So they were still in study mode. Sometimes it's hard after you've been working for a few years to put your study cap back on and take that test. So with many of you voting, we've got about 20% say, yes, they've taken it, they're happy with their score and done. And the remainder are evenly split with having taken it but plan to retake, and then not having taken it yet but preparing and confident. So always good to know that there are no people who, like me, are saying, do I have to take it? All right, with that, let's get started here. For those of you who joined us a little late, you are at the Stratus Admissions Counseling and Beat the GMAT webinar. Today we're talking about 2018 resolution, get an MBA. More specifically, why MBA and why now? So let's get started. My name is Susan Cera, and I'm here with my colleague Harold Szymanski. I'm going to let him introduce himself first and then jump back to me. So Harold, go for it.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy you could be here today. As you look at my resume here, or what I've done in the past, obviously I've done a bunch of different things, including some work in private equity. And I think that reflects the fact that all of our counselors have quite different experience, all the way from financial services, all the way into the sustainability world, a number of people coming out of media. So it's very important that as we create a team, we make sure that you are matched with someone who works for you across a few different dimensions, including maybe where you're from, or what industry you are in, or where you're going to, or even a few more than that. I have to tell you, with regard to this slide, I don't love it, and the reason is because it only shows me. Every client who we work with is likely to be touched by 4 or 5 different people at Stratus. And I think that's really where our advantage is, in making sure that you're really covered from all different dimensions, with different people helping you in different ways, and all of us working together on your behalf. And with that in mind, let me introduce you back to Susan, who is in fact the leader of our team. Susan?
All right. Thanks, Harold. And I like that Harold, presents this as even if you're working with Harold, it's not just Harold. Harold and I work together on a lot of clients. We're going to share some success stories with you today, and a lot of them are ones that I was the primary counselor in touch with this person every day, and Harold was supporting us, or vice versa. My name is Susan Cera. I'm the Director of MBA Admissions Counseling at Stratus. You can see my profile here. Between going to Dartmouth and getting my MBA at Duke, I worked in consulting. Coming out of business school, I worked as a product manager in the high-tech space. Just for some context, this was in the early 90s, where going into high-tech product management was really cutting edge. It would be the equivalent of going into fintech or med tech now. And one of the biggest areas of value that I add to our team is that I spent about a decade on admissions committee at Duke, where I read thousands of applications. And it was during that time that I realized that a lot of the people whose applications I was reading were likely way stronger than they were presenting themselves on paper. And it's for that reason that I joined Stratus. And I really enjoy working with clients to help them understand what's expected of them in this process and how to position themselves best. So with that, a little bit about Stratus. As Harold said, we work with hundreds of applicants every year. We have acceptances at all the top schools every year. We've got great ratings on Beat the GMAT, GMAT Club, Yelp. We've been featured experts. Harold does a great blog that if you are not signed up for it, you should absolutely sign up for it. It's called MBA Analysis Blog. It's really very current, thoughtful, and timely information about the MBA application process. Harold did speak to our team-based approach, where you're not working with just one counselor, you have a team behind you. So if you, for example, are working with one of our Wharton counselors and you're applying to Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, and Columbia, when your applications are nearly ready to go, your essays and your resume will be reviewed by someone else on the team who's not your counselor, who went to one of those schools or is very familiar with what those schools are looking for. And that allows kind of a blind read that mimics what admissions committee would be looking at, without the benefit of that reader having insight into your why that we're going to go into. Another thing that's very unique about Stratus is we offer a 4-school guarantee. If you work with us on a comprehensive package for 4 or more schools and are not admitted to any of those, we will work with you again, either in the following round. Perhaps, for example, if you applied in round 1 and you want to turn around and apply in round 2, we'll work with you again for free, either that next round or the following year. It's up to you. So it really gives our clients a lot of confidence in working with us. And we stand behind the way that we work with clients because we believe that this team-based approach really positions our clients most effectively for success. And with that, I'm going to put up the agenda, but I do want to position a little bit before this, which is getting an MBA is a really big undertaking. Yes, you probably have already gone to college, and that was a big decision as well. But moving forward, this is probably the largest investment you're going to make, save buying a house. $250,000 out of pocket, perhaps, that being the price tag, lost wages from walking away from your job that you have now, that you maybe have gotten settled into, having a consultant's paycheck coming in every month and gotten comfortable there. And in making any big purchase, whether it's an MBA or perhaps a car, you really need to do your due diligence. Harold and I were talking about this earlier about, what car were you driving when you went to business school? I went to business school when I was 25. I'd actually just bought a car. I didn't really need it at the time, but I bought it because I was going to a place where I needed a car for business school, and I had a Honda Accord because I knew that, I'd end up driving classmates around and, kind of carpooling to go out with friends. So I had a Honda Accord. That kind of met my needs at the time. Harold, on the other hand, what did you say you were driving in business school, Harold?
Right before I started business school, we got rid of our car because I was going to be in the city, and that worked out great for a year. And then I took my summer bonus for my summer job and then bought a Toyota. So it really did work out for me. And candidly, that's even something to think about. Are you going to be urban? Are you going to be more rural? Because it affects your lifestyle in many different ways, and not the least of which is whether or not you get a car.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a low price ticket item to buy a car. I was telling Harold that I just, after 14 years, just got rid of my minivan last year. I never would have imagined at the time that I started business school that, I'm trying to think of how long out of business school I was, maybe 10 years out of business school, that I, bought a minivan. But our family needed a minivan. We weren't all going to fit in the vehicle that we had at that point. So an MBA is very much the same thing, except for when I bought a minivan, I could sell my Honda Accord and upgrade to a minivan. When you get an MBA, this is a one-shot deal. You don't ever trade up. So you need to really think in advance of what MBA you need so that you get the right one. And that's exactly what we're going to walk you through here today. 3 big whys. Why MBA? Why now? Why this particular program? And we'll talk about how Stratus can help you. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end, and there will be, I believe, a short survey at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions throughout, don't hesitate to put them in. We may or may not have an opportunity to answer them throughout, but definitely at the end. And with that, let's jump into the quintessential question, which is why MBA? There are a real lot of good reasons to get an MBA, some better than others, and everyone, it really, for you need to figure out why you need an MBA. This is a transformational experience. This is not just like buying a car that you check the box, you go buy it. This is possibly 2 years of your life invested in a community where you're developing skills and knowledge and relationships that are going to help you move your career forward. So you need to really think about why it is that you want this degree and understand how to articulate that in the application process. So with that in mind, as I said, we're going to share some success stories here. The first one is a guy I worked with last year. He came to us as a reapplicant, a consultant, solid undergrad education. I think he had a 750 GMAT, which proves to you that your test scores and everything. If you can't present yourself well and articulate why you need an MBA and how an MBA fits in what you've accomplished to date, you may not be successful, as was the case with this particular individual. He had gotten to the interview stage the previous year, but had no admit. And with us, he ended up getting into Haas, Kellogg, and Booth, 3 top schools. But what we were able to help him with was he really had a vision for going into the environmental space, and he hadn't told that story the previous year. And we were able to draw out examples from his personal life, from his academic experience, and even some of his volunteer activities that aligned with this goal of going into the environmental space after business school. And he could explain how he could connect the dots from his past, building on the skills he developed as a consultant through an MBA to get to this new role that he was looking for. And so now he's in his first year at Kellogg. Next thing, self-reflection is a really big piece of understanding your why. When we start with a client, we do what we refer to as introspection or self-reflection exercises. And we ask these questions to really drill down and understand what is going on for a particular client. Harold, why don't you talk a little bit about the introspection for a second?
Sure. Absolutely. And one of the reasons we do the introspection is really to understand who you are, what motivates you, ideally pair some short-term goals as well as some long-term goals that really resonate with you. And this really is all part of us helping you create a unique story. Many people will come and they'll have a resume that candidly looks like everyone else. And I think that really is an obstacle to getting into the top business schools. If you look like everyone else, then invariably there's somebody who looks like you who's just a little better, whether that's a better GMAT score, a better GPA, went to a better school. However, the way that you can really stand out is by telling a unique story. What has brought you to where you are today? What has really helped you, or how have you thought about the future? And what does that reflect in terms of what you've done in the past? So I think what is terrific about our self-reflection process, even though for many people it's quite the most painful part of the process, because you really sometimes have to go way back in time to understand what has motivated you to be where you are today. But it also really allows us to work together to create a story that only you can tell, and a story that gets you into the top business school. And Susan, I think we have a couple of examples of folks who have done that.
Yep, exactly. And this one is a client I worked with last year. She came to us, she's a CPA, had decent grades, degree in accounting from undergrad, worked in a big audit firm, and your typical kind of audit role where she had been promoted as was expected, was managing small teams. She did not want to see herself in the role of her manager a couple years out. So she knew that she had to make a change, and she wanted to get an MBA. She knew it was kind of the right degree, but couldn't put her head around why she needed it and what her goal would be. And we spent a lot of time during her introspection of, coming to understand what really motivated her. That she liked working with other people. She really liked working with numbers, but all of the work she had been doing in audit was very kind of reflective and more post-mortem on numbers, and she wanted to go and develop new skills and learn to use numbers and financials in a more strategic way. And that's how we ended up, she ended up presenting herself. And she's now in her first year at Duke and loving it. Her hope is to get into a finance rotational program at a large company, and then ultimately move on to be, the head of, a CFO or something along those lines. And let's see if we have another story here. Harold, I'll let you talk a little bit more here, Harold, about building your story. You talked about this a little bit on the self-reflection page. Is there anything you want to highlight from this one?
The only thing I'd say is, at the end of the day, the application process is a very human process. You're going to have real people reading your story. So your story does have to be a compelling one. It can't simply be a resume in prose. It really has to engage people and really go back in time so that people start to get you, understand what's behind the resume. And that includes different parts of who you are, whether it's some knowledge you've developed, skills you've developed, relationships with other people, as well as what you can bring to an MBA program. Because again, MBA programs are looking to build small communities of people coming from all different parts of the world, all different industries, all different functions. So with that in mind, you also have to be clear to them how you're going to fit into the community. And Susan, I think we have a great example next, which is, it's sort of an interesting story here. This actually is the story of a twin. We worked with two folks from India who had very similar backgrounds. Where they differed, however, is what they wanted to do in the future and why it was important to them. So this person in particular really wanted to move from a private equity world into impact investing, as well as just having a much broader view of the power of business. And on the surface, he looked exactly like his twin. I mean, one couldn't imagine two more similar people. But his story and what he talked about with regards to the skills he needed developed to what he could bring to a community so resonated with Wharton that that's where he ended up, as opposed to his twin, who's at INSEAD, but again, for similar reasons. This idea that you tell a story that has you, for all different reasons, going to be a great part of that business school, be it Wharton or be it INSEAD. And again, this is a process that at times is almost uncomfortable because you really have to go behind your resume to help people understand why all of this makes sense, why you've done what you've done, why you want to do what you want to do, and how that specific business school fits into your plans.
Yeah, and Harold, let me just add something there, because during my time at Duke, one of the teams that I was on spent a lot of time and really understood that universe. Was I read hundreds of Indian applications every year. And in many of those applications, these are people who had GMAT scores that I didn't know that you could even get. You know, 770, 780, like 790. Like I would see that every so often and be like, really, is that a legal GMAT score? This guy who's at Wharton had a GMAT that's not even impressive for an Indian guy, below the average below the average at Wharton, well below the average of your average Indian candidate. Yet through pulling his story together, he was able to overcome weaker grades undergrad and that weaker test score as well. Very important to be able to have, put everything together to have the success that he had. All right, with that, here's just a quick story that I want to share about our introspection. I worked with a client 2 years ago who had her sights set really super high. She had a great profile, went to one of the public Ivies, had maybe a 750 GMAT, worked in investment banking, started a nonprofit. She only was applying to Harvard and Stanford because, she felt like, oh, well, if I'm going to get an MBA, I should get it from one of the two top schools in the country. But, frankly, she really didn't know why she wanted an MBA. She just thought she should have one because that's what you do after you've worked in investment banking for a few years. The reality was she ended up on the wait list at Harvard. And once she was put on the wait list at Harvard, she kind of lost interest. She realized that what she had learned about herself through the introspection process was that she didn't need an MBA to get where she wanted to go. And she ended up not even pursuing the wait list at Harvard. And within 6 months had made a transition from her investment banking role into a startup in the digital health space. And she said, maybe in a couple of years I'll need an MBA. But what we discovered, or what she discovered, was to get where she thought she wanted to go post-MBA, she could get there without an MBA. So with that, we'll talk about why now. And I'll let Harold take this one in terms of why now. Is this the right time? Looking at your profile, is it the right time?
Yeah, frequently we tell clients that there's 3 important questions to think about as you're thinking about an MBA. First of all is, why do you need an MBA? As Susan just mentioned, some people don't need an MBA, and we help them understand that. The other question is, why at this particular school? Schools are not commodities. In fact, every school has different personality, different strengths, different weaknesses, and a good applicant is able to explain why they want that particular school. What is it about that school? But almost as important is this idea of why is now the time to get an MBA? And that is something you actually have to make it clear, because at the end of the day, while the average is 5 to 6 years of work experience, the reality is, if you have a story as far as why you're applying to business school after 2 years, if there's good reasons there, then you're a very credible candidate. Similarly, if you've been in the workforce for 8 years, but there's a good reason for you to apply to go to business school, then that's something else business schools have to know. And a lot has to do with simply, have you reached a point in your career where in some ways you've learned all you can, and now there's time for you to develop expertise in other areas? Or for many of you, you may have already been in a career for a number of years and realize, heck, there's a lot of other things I want to do. So that, in fact, may be another reason why the timing of the MBA is right for you. One thing that I like to tell many of my clients, particularly my younger clients, it's not that you're just competing against other people, other applicants, but you're also competing against yourself in terms of, our business school is going to think, this person should have applied to business schools a few years ago. So that's going to raise a red flag. And similarly, they may look at a candidate who's very young and say, they're simply not ready for business school. So if you're in one of those demographics, then it's even more important that you help the admissions committee understand why now, in fact, is the right time. And
with
Susan,
that, Harold, I think we've got some stories here.
Yep.
This guy who maybe could have applied with 3 or 4 years of experience in investment banking, but waited a couple of years. So talk to us a little bit about him.
Yeah, that's right. So this individual is now at Harvard Business School, and he went through the business school application process a few years before that with your classic. He didn't end up applying, but was deep in the process and decided not to. And he had your classic background, which was Ivy League school, a couple of years in investment banking, and a couple of years in private equity, a very good GMAT score. At the time, though, everyone recognized, he recognized, and I certainly echoed that when I spoke to him, is that he was not yet a compelling candidate. He looked a lot like other candidates. At that point, he had learned so many different skills that if he wanted to continue in private equity, there was almost no reason for him to go to business school. So at that point, though, he took a complete turn to the left. And what he ended up doing is starting his own company in Long Island that was doing, it was a startup that was doing natural and healthy soda. And I thought it was a really interesting company. It ended up not doing well. He ended up shutting it down. And then he ended up going to work for one of the largest organic producers of a certain vegetable in the middle of Pennsylvania. And it was really near nothing. But you can imagine how his story changed based on those last few years. So rather than him coming to Harvard Business School as someone who honestly looked like everybody else in all sorts of different ways, despite him being a good candidate, but the reality is you have to be more than that now at Harvard Business School. He came in there talking about things like how his business had failed and what that meant to him. Talking about things, what it is to work in a factory in the middle of Pennsylvania and the different issues around that. So when all said and done, I'm convinced the reason this person is at Harvard Business School now rather than somewhere else is because of those last few years of experience, because of those less traditional things that he did. And in many ways, he makes a far more compelling candidate, and a candidate that business schools are interested in because he brings such a wealth of different experiences.
All right. And Harold's got some more people here that we're going to share some success stories of.
Yeah, sure. So my next candidate was really interesting in terms of he came from very much an overrepresented demographic. He also came with a very marginal to low GMAT score. One piece of the GMAT score is, in fact, the lowest I'd ever seen. The IRR score was of 2. And you just don't see that a lot. So given all of those things, he was not a particularly compelling candidate when we started this process. However, we were able to work with him in order to develop a story around how he had spent time in Southeast Asia. During that time, he had worked with some small startups. He had also done some interesting things that were extracurricular here in the United States. And he also talked about moving through a couple of different jobs, one at one of the blue chip consulting firms, but then not stopping there and doing some other types of companies, including a startup, including a few years with a venture capital firm. And that made him a much more compelling candidate, just the wide diversity of experience, and even more so how thoughtful he had been of going from step to step. And that's what we really helped him to articulate, is that he just didn't stop at one thing. There was a reason he went from A to B and from B to C. And that at first was a story that was very much lost in everything else that was going on, in everything else that he had done. And what is also interesting about this candidate is that I started working with him in April. And first deadline was in September. And it really took us that long to figure out what his story was. So for any of you who are thinking, wow, isn't this so early to start in this process? I could not say it more strongly. Absolutely not. This process, if done right, takes a number of months. And the reason for that is we really want to understand who you are, and we really want to make sure that you know why you're going to business school and why you're going to one particular business school versus another. All of that takes time. All of it is a little painful, and it is a process, though, at the end that yields results, and results not just in acceptance rates, but also on the personal level. You do find out something about yourself. The bottom line with this candidate is, despite some things, some real potholes in his candidacy, he also didn't go to a particularly top undergraduate education, middling GMAT, middling GPA. He's now going to be starting Wharton in September.
Awesome. Great story. And I think I've got another one for you, Harold.
Yeah,
this is actually cut and pasted from an email that Harold and I both got back in December. So Harold can give a little bit of color on the transformation for this particular candidate.
Sure. And this was a great candidate. Susan and I worked very hard with her, I have to say. Both of us actually really put in a lot of time. And we worked with her over 2 years. And it finally paid off in that she is going to Duke starting in September. But a big part of our job was actually more than helping her with her applications. She came to us having done a number of different things and was somewhat between jobs. She had been working, doing a little contracting work. So what we really helped her do is get her story right, as well as her resume right. We encouraged her to go back to a startup that she had worked with it for some period of time, really to help tell a story of how she was going from the world of technology consulting into social impact investing and starting her own nonprofit. So we really helped her piece together a story over time that showed social impact investing was not a complete step to the side. Rather, it was really the result of many different experiences she had. And even though they may have not been dominant experiences, we were able to help her craft a story where they all came together and made sense, so that the answer to the question of why an MBA was clear. The answer to the question as far as how an MBA will impact what she does in the future was clear. And in many ways, that's what the admissions committee is looking for. They want to understand you. They want to understand your motivation. And at that point, you need to tell them the story, because I don't care who you are. Your stats alone are not getting into any business school. All of us have stories of people with low GMATs getting into top business schools, and high GMATs, frequently people who only come to us after that first experience applying, of high GMATs not getting into the schools they want. It's not a bad time to throw in the fact that probably, if we are reading the numbers correctly, we estimate that somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of Wharton students have a 780 or above on their GMAT score. So this idea here that any GMAT gets you in is simply incorrect, particularly those GMATs that are in the very good range, 720, 730, 740. That's simply not enough anymore. What makes a great candidate is understanding their motivation about what they have done and how it all leads to business school. So with that in mind, Susan, I'm going to pass it back to Susan to talk about one of our combined favorite candidates, just a lovely, lovely guy who Susan worked with very hard, and I helped out where I could, who's now going to be starting school, and I guess it is a month from now. Isn't that right, Susan?
I think he started right now. So
okay.
This guy, an Indian national, but not your typical Indian engineer. He worked in the energy space in oil and gas in a very, very specific job. And, if you know anything about the energy industry right now, it's very cyclical, boom and bust cycles. The companies are hiring people and firing them and such. So, as soon as you start seeing a recession on the horizon, a lot of people from the energy industry say, okay, now it's probably the time for me to go get an MBA, and I'll take these 2 years to ride out the recession and come back into the industry, working for an oil and gas company, or maybe I'll go work in sustainable energy, or maybe I'll go into consulting. It's something that's pretty straightforward and easy to connect the dots on. This guy took an entirely different tact at that boom bust cycle. He was on the higher end in terms of years of work experience, so he had ridden out quite a few of those cycles in a large service provider to the oil and gas industry. And what he had noticed was that the company would hire people on, invest in their training, bring them on board. They'd work for a couple of years. They'd do really well, get paid really well, and then they'd get fired. And he had managed to make it through all these firings and was still there. But he noticed that it just took a toll on the teams he was working on the individuals. And he had done a rotational stint in human resources. And so the way he presented himself for business school was not that he wanted to go back into energy consulting or sustainable energy. He wanted to take on a role in human resources or human capital to be able to help energy companies more effectively manage their human capital so that they wouldn't be hiring and firing. They wouldn't be investing in people only to toss them to the side a year or two later after spending months of training them in whatever it was they needed to do that was very specific to this particular company. And we did a lot of brainstorming with him, and he is now just starting in the J-term program at Columbia Business School. Never dreamed that he'd be going to an M7 school, and yet there he is. I got an email from him last week. He's freezing his butt off, and despite the fact that he's from the foothills of the Himalayas, I think it's much colder in New York in the winter. And with that, let's see, why this program? Harold talked about this a little bit before, about kind of finding the program that's right for you. And we look at it in kind of 4 different ways, like the 4 C's. Things that we encourage you to look at once you decide that, yes, I do need an MBA. Think about this as buying your car. You want the car that's going to meet your specific needs. Maybe it's a pickup truck. I don't know. Look at the curriculum. So, if you want to take on a career in the healthcare space, is there a healthcare certificate or a program, curriculum around healthcare? Look at the teaching styles. Harvard is known for being a school that teaches almost exclusively in the case method. Other schools are very heavily lecture-based. There are some wonderful programs that offer experiential learning opportunities. My favorites these days, my 2 favorites are Michigan Ross with their MAP program and UCLA Anderson with their AMR program, which is really capstone hands-on project in both of these instances that you work on with a team of classmates. So you want to look at what the curriculum looks like. You want to look at the clubs. If, for example, you're interested in going into the energy space, is there an energy club? Are there clubs related to your kind of side interests, whether it's stand-up comedy or wine or whatever? These are places where you're going to test your classroom learning in perhaps organizing a conference or organizing a trek to the Silicon Valley to visit a bunch of technology companies. And through these clubs, you're going to develop your leadership skills. You're going to build relationships, perhaps in the industry that you're trying to get into. The third area is community or culture. What is this environment like? Is this a school that is very collaborative and supportive? Do you do a lot of work on teams? Are you assigned to a team perhaps for your whole first semester or your first year? Is that something you want? What are you looking for? And finally, the last C is connections. And this is more of how you know what you know about the first 3 C's. So we encourage our clients to reach out to students, reach out to alumni, connect with admissions committees or professors even. Harold and I worked with a client last year who was very interested in blockchain and fintech and had reached out to a professor at the school he ended up being accepted to, and had a bunch of conversations about the research that this particular professor was doing around blockchain. And then ultimately student there was sharing what he had learned in his current role. Great ways to learn. So with that, we're going to talk about,
Susan, let me
go ahead, Harold.
Yeah, let me just jump in here. And I know you're going to go through a few examples, but I'm sort of busting to talk about very quickly a few people that we really added value by helping them identify schools that they didn't even know would be perfect for them. I think my ultimate example is I had a client from India who was very interested in human resource development as well, didn't have much money. So I ended up connecting him with Brigham Young University. And if you don't know, Brigham Young University is in the middle of Utah, a Mormon school. And at first blush, one would not expect an Indian engineer who had not spent any time in the United States to end up there. But it was perfect for him on a few different dimensions. First of all, they're very good at human resource management. It's also a wealthy school, so he got a scholarship. He happens to like the mountains, so I communicate him actually pretty frequently, and he loves it there. And it's going to do everything for him that he could imagine. And I take great pride in this, in the fact that it was a school he had never even heard of. And it turns out that it's really a great school for him. And I think all of our counselors see one piece of value add that certainly is something we work on, and many times we use the team, is to help you figure out, okay, we all know the top schools, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton's, but there are other schools that are likely going to be great for you. And it's important that and we help you identify them.
Yes, so that's a great example. I had forgotten that we didn't do a profile of that client, and an excellent example. But here's an example of a client who came to us. She actually had applied on her own 2 years in a row and had failed. And she had a background in very data-driven, a variety of different roles. Her goal was to go into entertainment. And at first blush, it seemed ridiculously disconnected from everything she had done in the past. But in doing her introspection, we dug into her personal passion for being really creative, that whenever she's in a meeting, she doodles, and that helps her to put shape around her ideas. And in the end, we directed her to UCLA Anderson, and she's still in play at Stern, where she's waiting to hear back after her interview, but she got a full ride Forte Fellowship at UCLA after 2 years of trying on her own and not getting in anywhere, not even an acceptance. So a huge win. And I'm super excited for her, because she's going to be, whether she, if she gets into NYU, she can also kind of get into the entertainment space, but UCLA is a perfect place for someone who's looking to take the skills they have from a different area and then transition them into the entertainment space. And next example is this candidate came to us. He had 10 years of work experience. He had done his undergrad in Africa. I'm not sure that his GMAT was even above a 600. And it had never occurred, he loved his job. It had never occurred to him that getting an MBA did not require him to step away from his role for 2 years. I want to say he had a family, he was married, had a family, so giving up his income for 2 years was going to be quite a hit on his family. And in the end, we had him work with him on applications to a few kind of mid-career one-year programs, and he is now at the EMBA program at Booth, where he's located in Ohio, can easily get to Chicago when he needs to go for his sessions, but it never occurred to him that he could get a top 5 MBA and do it as an executive MBA. So again, introspection allowing us to discover or help a client to discover the right place for them and the right format of an education that's going to get them moving forward towards their dreams. And this candidate is one reapplicant, did not came to us after failing on his own. He had talked to some other consulting firms. One of our competitors said, we can't even help you get into that school. We won't even help you. Won't take you as a client because you cannot get into Columbia. And, we worked with him, drew out his story, helped him to really articulate his goals. And guess what? He's heading to Columbia. And we believed in him and he believed in himself, and, kind of an average Indian American candidate, but by being able to pull his story together, by getting to know him personally, we were able to help him shape that narrative that got him a spot in his top school. So finally, we're going to talk, we shared how Stratus has helped a lot of people. Here are a few examples of clients who've worked with us in the past who don't fall into specifically the introspection, but there are some instances where we start with clients a year or two ahead of when they're going to apply. And we really dig into their profiles and understand their strengths and weaknesses and how an MBA can help them towards their goals. And we can do exactly that with any of you. I'm actually going to skip past this slide because now is really the time for you to start your transformation. If your resolution is that you want to get an MBA, actually, let me go back. This cartoon I stumbled upon, and I absolutely love it because, if you reflect on the stories that we've shared, we worked with a lot of people who had applied on their own, thought they could do it. Hey, I got a 750 GMAT. I went to an Ivy League institution. I did really well. I've got a good job. I've got this. But as I said when I introduced myself, I spent 10 years reading applications. There are plenty of people who have a profile that on paper you would think would get them into a top MBA program, but they're not telling the story. They don't put it all together. These are the people who are carrying their rocks around in a cart with square wheels and think that they can do it because they're just too busy to get help to do it the right way. So don't let that be you. We talked earlier about our team-based approach, leveraging the collective wisdom and experience of dozens on our team. The next step is for you to learn how Stratus can accelerate your transformation. The transformation that happens now and continues through your MBA to get you to those goals in your future. So contact us to do a free 30-minute consultation. A couple ways you can reach out. You can either email us at consult@stratusadmissions.com, or you can visit our website and go to /R1 Success and fill out the form there. And if you complete your free consultation by February 7th, we will give you a customized discount off of our rates that you see on our website. And with that, I am going to now open it up to questions. I see maybe a few have come in throughout. Appreciate you guys listening to our stories of success and for joining us today. And go ahead and ask questions at this point.
Susan, just as folks are asking their questions, there's one other thing that I want to add about how we work. And first of all, it's very individualized. When you start working with us, there's nothing that's going to be cookie cutter. We're going to make sure that you're matched with the right person. We're going to make sure that we really take the time to understand your story, even if that takes maybe a little longer than we first anticipated. And also, all of our counselors are just very passionate about helping the applicant get into the school they want and making the right choices. I think one of my favorite stories is working with my another counselor by the name of Donna. Donna is very committed to her clients and someone with whom we have worked really hard with, an applicant who had, somewhat middling grades, middling GMAT score, got into this woman's top choice. And when Donna let me know that, Donna was crying on the phone. So I think that's just indicative of the passion that we all bring to this process and really our desire to help you succeed. So with that in mind, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great story, Harold, because the week of when decisions are released in December is like a complete emotional roller coaster for myself and for any of our counselors. You go from the heartbreak of someone not getting into a top school to the elation. I'm getting goosebumps right now just even thinking about it, but the excitement that I get when I get that email from a client, like the one we showed you from our client who got into Duke, it was all these emojis in it and lots of exclamation points. This is why we do what we do, because we love to help young professionals understand what their dreams are and then move towards realizing them through an MBA. So thank you for those who said where you were in the world. We had a couple folks in Canada and New Mexico. Excuse me, not New Mexico, in Mexico. So We did have a couple people with us who are planning to start a program this fall. Everything we talked about here is still very valid. If you have not yet submitted applications, reach out to us as quickly as possible. Round 3 is a very tough round. We also work with clients on wait lists. I'm working with a couple right now, in shock actually for how poor some applications were, but at least got them to a wait list situation, and thrilled that I can help them kind of make that final step if it's possible, by continuing to demonstrate their interest in a school and keeping engaging with a particular program. We've got one question here about, when's the right time to start? It's now the January 25th. So Harold, when do you think the right time is to start if someone wants to start a program next year in 2019?
I think it's tomorrow. And to some degree, I'm exaggerating, but not really. I think we've done some internal numbers ourselves, and we feel like your chance of acceptance goes up dramatically the earlier you start. I think our numbers, Susan, correct me, around 20%, meaning if you start with us early, it really can make a big difference. And sometimes starting with us may mean us helping you understand where there are the holes in your candidacy and what you need to do over the next 6 months to fill them. Other times, if you have a complicated story like one of my clients had, it may take us a series of months for us to really pull it apart, unpeel the onion, if you will, and see what pieces of it make sense and answer the question, why an MBA? So again, I'm not really being facetious here. I would love you to start now, if only by talking to us on the phone. That certainly is a great first step.
Yeah. All right. You guys can ask questions, so please type your questions in. We've got one question. Do you think it's better to complete the GMAT first? I will take that. Honestly, if you wait to take your GMAT and get where you want to be, you've got perhaps weeks, months that you haven't been working on putting your narrative together and understanding why you want an MBA. I definitely encourage people to work in parallel. So studying for the GMAT, that's one part of your brain and one part of your focus. Digging into your past stories and thinking about where you want to go in your future is a really nice way to balance out the tediousness of prepping for the GMAT or the GRE. And frankly, GMAT is not always the answer. I've worked with a lot of clients who come to me set that they have to take the GMAT, but at some point switch gears and switch to the GRE. I'd rather get started with you while you're preparing for your GMAT, because the GMAT may not be the right test for you, and you might, based on conversations with a counselor, switch gears and go and take that GRE. So hopefully that answered your question.
Susan, I just want to, yeah. I'm sorry, Susan. I just want to
add to that.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something. I guess it was an earlier question with regard to applying round 3. And in fact, I just wrote a blog on applying round 3. And what it really says is you have to have a very compelling reason to apply round 3. Schools generally have an acceptance rate for round 3 that is much lower than what one would expect. So in order for round 3 to make sense, you have to be able to articulate why you're applying then, how a business degree at this point is the right choice for you. So if you're thinking about round 3, I would absolutely call us over the next couple of days, because you really do have to hit the ground running to tell a story that explains it's already, February, March, April. What makes you think you want to go to business school? What makes you think you want to go here? And help us confirm the fact that you've thought this through, that you're not just throwing some applications over the transom with the hope, well, if something sticks, then I'll go to business school, because that is a strategy that very rarely works.
Yeah. And actually, Harold just made a great point here with where do you want to go? One reason to get started with us and start answering those questions of why now, why MBA, and why a particular program is that ideally, if you want to start a program in 2019, you're going to apply in round one this year, with those deadlines being in September and October. And if you work backwards from that, that means that you should be visiting these programs in March or April, maybe May. A lot of schools have graduations in May. So if you wait until May, they're already in exams and the school's done for the year. You want to be getting feet on the ground, engaging with students in March and April. That's like 2 months from now. And you don't want to go there blind without being able to answer the question of why MBA. And you want to be thoughtful about what programs you're visiting. You know, it costs money to make these visits, and you don't want to, you know, be visiting 10 schools where only 3 of them end up being ones that will have the resources to get you from where you are to where you want to be. So that's another reason to get started now.
Absolutely. I would just echo that only because it's so important. Starting early is a tremendous advantage. As they say, you can always start too late, but you can never start too early. So I would really encourage everybody who's listening to get going on this process really as soon as possible, because it does make a huge difference.
Yeah. We just had a question about, you know, kind of cost of our services. You know, if you look at the overall cost of getting an MBA, you know, forget for a minute that you're going to give up the salary that you're currently making for 2 years. Out-of-pocket cost is probably going to be $200,000 to $250,000. The services that we offer at Stratus, our comprehensive services, start just below $5,000 and move up from there. We also offer hourly services. This is a drop in the bucket compared to what you are going to spend on an MBA. And a lot of our clients find that they end up getting merit scholarships. There's one client I worked with this year who, you know, people were asking her, how are you spending like $6,000 with a consultant to work on your applications? You know what? She got into 3 schools this fall. And it's actually one of the slides I skipped past really quickly. She got into 3 schools. One of them offered her a Forte fellowship worth, I think it was $60,000 total, so $30,000 a year. Another offered her a Forte fellowship plus a dean's fellowship. That essentially means the cost of her MBA would be $0 out of pocket. Now, can you do the math there and figure out whether the $6,000 or $7,000 she paid to put forth really compelling applications was a good investment for her? She absolutely would say that this was probably the best money that she spent. And a lot of our clients say that. We've had a lot of, I'm not remembering the numbers off of the top of my head, but our clients typically get millions of dollars in scholarships each year. And we did highlight a few that got full rides, and Harold talked about, you know, an Indian engineer who got money at BYU. When I was in admissions at Duke, we used to say about Indian nationals, your acceptance is your gift. Don't expect any money from us. Yeah, because there's another Indian candidate who would figure out a way to pay $200,000 to come here without getting any money. So
yes.
Any last questions or any last thoughts?
Susan, let me just add one point to build off of that, which is if you come to us and tell us a scholarship is very important to you, we can certainly help you find the right school, say the right things, and even negotiate when you finally get your acceptances to work towards getting the scholarship you want or need. That certainly is something we can help you with from the very beginning until you decide on that final school.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I had a client I worked with 2 years ago who came to me. She probably was a very compelling candidate for a place like, a Wharton. She had the stats to go there. But she said, Susan, I'm very debt averse. I don't want to pay for my MBA. I got scholarship to go to undergrad. I want to come out with as close to no debt as possible. She ended up getting a dean's fellowship at IU Kelly, where not only did she get money, but she gets access to mentors, to faculty, all sorts of things that at Wharton she wouldn't have gotten. Yet she's really very much a big fish in a much smaller pond at IU Kelley, and she'll graduate this spring with virtually no debt. And with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for joining us. We have reached the top of the hour. Please do reach out to get a consult with us, and look forward to connecting with all of you, and wish you all the best in this MBA journey and the transformation that it will bring to you. Have a great rest of your day.